over the years at Super Bowl and Radio Row, this being my 32nd, and it was probably about 15, 18 years ago, the Wounded Warrior Project became a staple of Radio Row. And we've had unbelievable veterans from all the military and then players who were here. Brian and Natalie Vines join us, who are a part of the Wounded Warrior Project and much, much more. Wow, this is great. And that program, to me, I loved it. And I think Dick Butkus initially and Mike Ditka and all them were some of the ones. So you've been through it. You guys have both fought for our country. Congratulations. Thank you very much for doing so. What are you trying to let people know more about besides I know PTSD and much more of that?
Well, I think, first of all, thank you for having us on. And just a little bit about Natalie and myself. I spent 28 years in the Army, and Natalie spent 21 years in the Army, both those with multiple combat tours. Natalie was injured over there, and when she came home, really I became her full-time caregiver.
Okay.
She was medically retired. I retired so I could take care of her 24/7. And it was through programs like Wounded Warrior Project and through their Odyssey program, which the NFL supports, that really helped us in our communication skills with both of us dealing with that. And it turned what could have been a tragedy into a love story. And this past November, we've been married for 25 years.
That's awesome. Congratulations very much. What would you be if you had never met him?
I think I would. I'd be lost. When I met him, we met at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, in the airborne unit, and it was love at first sight. And we followed each other throughout our whole career through many separations. And we actually had a 3-year separation where it was bounced back and forth through military assignments, through deployments, back and forth. And our faith, our love is what made it happen. I don't think I would have made it without him. Through my injuries, through PTSD, through my medical situations, through my suicide attempts. It was him who stuck with me through it all. Without the help of Wounded Warrior Project and their mental health programs, through their Odyssey, through the Odyssey, love language and their faith programs, I wouldn't have made it without Brian. We did this stuff together. We did the programs together. And without him, I wouldn't have made it.
Brian, my father was a Vietnam vet, and he suffered from PTSD that he did not get treated until very later on in his life. And it changed everything about, he became a different person, then he became himself again after he went through the programs. I think it's a very arduous process, as you guys know, but the reward on the other side is so good because you get to be yourself again. What would you say to veterans who are afraid to go in there? Because I think my dad was a little bit afraid, and then he found that oh no, I'm certainly not alone.
I think we found that when a soldier or any service member comes back from combat, that whether they identify or not, they most likely have some form or some degree of PTSD. And the first thing that a lot of our medical professionals do is subscribe to them medications, antidepressants, anxiety medications, sleep medications. The service member begins to feel isolated, depressed, and it starts this downward spiral, which unfortunately at the bottom is suicide. And one of the things that Wounded Warrior Project does so well is that they break that cycle, that downward cycle, and lets the service member know that they're not alone. And helps them get out of this isolation, helps them get out of this feeling of hopelessness through programs like Project Odyssey that helps them deal with combat trauma. And that's one of the reasons we're here today, is because through the NFL, through their Salute to Service program, they fund nonprofits like Wounded Warrior Project that is having a deep and meaningful impact on the lives of our service members returning home.
if you don't mind, because we want to make sure we open this up to those who aren't doing well, and you weren't doing well. And did you actually try to take your life?
Yes, I actually tried to take my life six times. The last time I took my life, I actually took his 9mm across from the VA. I had an appointment that day. Unfortunately, the VA called me. I had taken enough anxiety, depression medications that knocked me out, but they actually heard me load and cock the weapon. It actually knocked me out to where they found me unconscious with the weapon in my hand. They incubated me, took me to the hospital. I think when I got out of the hospital, I read the report, which was written in the VA notes. I woke up at 2 o'clock in that morning when I read it. I woke my husband up crying in his arms. The next day I made that decision. I was on so many anti-anxiety, depression medicines that I quickly made the decision to stop all those medications cold turkey against anything that the VA would recommend, except for my seizure medications. And 3 days later, Brian said, I'm back to Natalie. I reached out to Wounded Warrior Project for their mental health programs. There was one in Boston, Massachusetts called Home Base. They sent me there with my caregiver. I went to the 2-week program. Later on, I went to a Road Hope program that they had offered in Chicago. After that, I never looked back. I learned coping skills to better help myself. I developed a support system through Wounded Warrior program that connected me with other veterans. That I now have a list of 5 personal veterans that I call on. I now talk to Brian, which I wasn't able to talk to before, because when you're married to another service member who goes through the same PTSD symptoms, you don't want to share that with him because he's sharing the same stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very hard to share that with him. And we learn to communicate that together. So you develop those through Wounded Warrior programs and their activities, their sporting events, and through their Project Odyssey. Just you learn to develop those skills to communicate. And I learned to do that. Without their programs and without the NFL support and their contributions to those programs, I would have never been able to do that. And ever since 2017, I have never looked back. I've never had a suicidal ideation, attempt. I use those coping skills daily. I was able to get a service dog that helped me through that. Just never looked back. And I have that support. I have my husband Brian. I have the Wounded Warrior Project. If I ever have those problems again, I know where to go to.
Well, clearly, you're here for a reason.
That's correct.
I mean, you tried a lot of things and it didn't work, and that's a message from somewhere else saying no, I need you helping people out, and that's an amazing story. What about the you always kind of find second families in life. Is that your second family? Is that what it is? You have the family you're born with and the family you find. Has this Wounded Warrior, has it been kind of the family you found?
Yes, I have a new purpose in life, and that's to live. And that's to live for not only the veterans that died on my watch, that sacrificed their lives. I have a purpose to live for those veterans that I served with, my husband, my family. Have a new purpose in life for fitness, for activity. I love working out. The programs that they offered me with the outdoor activities has gotten me out of isolation. I have a new purpose in life, which I didn't have when I got out of the military. I had no purpose. I lost that sense of purpose. I lost that sense of identity. And now I've gained that back through Wounded Warrior Project.
So you've told your story, which is amazing, and thank God. You had PTSD as well. What levels did you suffer through, or what was some of what you dealt with?
So dealing with just exposure in combat to losing soldiers, to being put into very difficult situations as to the environment I was in and what I was doing at the time. I really didn't self-identify as having PTSD, even though I was displaying all the symptoms. And another way that I dealt with my PTSD is by hiding them and masking them so I could be supporting her and focused on her, which I learned later on that was a very bad thing to do, and that you can't hide it, you can't push it down into the deepest depths of your body. It's going to come back, and it's going to come back at its own time, which it has. And we were on a trip in the Bahamas going scuba diving, and that's just when I broke. I was just in a circle of veterans, and that's when I cried in her arms and told her, the things that I'd seen and the things that I'd done. And it was like just this big weight lifted off of my shoulders. It was something I was scared of. I was fearful of doing that. But once I did it.
Of breaking?
Yeah. Because I didn't want my burden to become her burden.
Right.
But once it happened, I mean, it was just, it was life-changing. And I think it brought us closer together. Because I think that's something she wanted from me, is to tell her my story, which I was very protective of, afraid I'd be judged on it. But it happened.
I hear that, and my father was in the hospital. It was about 2 years before he died. He was in the hospital, and we were just sitting there, and every time he was in the hospital, he'd like to watch Lonesome Dove. So we're watching. You guys are from Texas. I'm sure you've seen Lonesome Dove. It's a requirement to live in the state. So we're watching Lonesome Dove. I'm going to change the DVD out, and he goes, "Hey, before we start the other one, I gotta tell you something. My whole life, I've been fascinated by history and the military and all these things. And so he had this photo albums from Vietnam, and I would always ask him questions. And even when I was a kid, I always felt like he was like leaving parts of the story out. And my mom would be like, look, it's different. He just doesn't want to. It was really bad. Like, it's not, he has good memories of the guys. His best friend was with him in Vietnam. I mean, they were all like, I knew him. And he's like, they just don't want to talk about it. And then he had that moment where he told me everything he'd seen and all these different things. And he said, hey, there's a file, like you can read the whole story and all that. And it just, like, it changed the last 2 years of, like, there he is again. Like, he'd come out of it, but it's that same moment. And that's really interesting to hear you say that like, that is the moment of just releasing yourself from these things that you saw or you experienced that weren't your fault, or, that just are part of being a service person. And that's amazing. And I hope more veterans hear this and say, you know what, it's okay, because people are, I'm not, again, experiencing this in a vacuum.
We have veterans who have been everywhere that watch our show, subscribers of our afternoon talk show. And sometimes whenever we bring up the military or whatever, they'll start kind of communicating together. And there have been some that have been through, again, excruciating times, brutal times. I don't think anyone who's, again, I'm a military brat, and my father was never really on the front line. He was at Ton Salut Air Force Base in Vietnam, but that was it. Very fortunate. Do people really understand what you all do see and what you've been through and what our military does?
I'll answer that first, and you may have a different perspective, Natalie, but it's hard, it's hard to understand how someone is unless you've walked in their boots.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can see things on TV and you pass judgment on, what's real and what's not real. But reality is totally different for one person than it may be from another person that's looking at that person. So I would say there's big differences. What would you say?
I was watching a TV show the other day, a reality TV show, and there was someone that said, I'm always in control. And it was funny because in combat, you're never in control. You're always in reaction mode. And you're always on the fly, and you have to be able to adapt and overcome. And that's one of those things people don't understand. And when we come back, a lot of times people don't understand that veterans kind of lost that sense of purpose. We've lost that identity. We isolate a lot more. Our anxiety's up a little bit more. our sense of life is a little bit different. And so we're trying to find our place in society again. And just being accepted again is very difficult. And we don't know how to be in that civilian environment again. And just being able to integrate again is very difficult for us. And I know from myself and even for Brian, it was just very difficult to just all of a sudden pop out of the military, very active, 24/7 environment, and come back and go, what are we doing now? Mm-hmm. How do we act? We're so sense of going, and both of us coming from, I was able to serve enlisted as an NCO and then become an officer, go from that level to all of a sudden nothing to do, and be in those leadership roles and be in those combat roles, and all of a sudden nothing. It was very hard for us.
It sounds, and this is why the NFL reaches you guys. I mean, obviously it's different, but it's similar, because when you're a football player, you're a football player, you're a football player, you're a football player, and then just like you guys, you don't necessarily always get to pick when it's over. The lucky ones get to pick, I'm retiring today, I'm doing this, I'm fine, everything worked out for me. The ones who have to go through it tougher are the ones who are told, that's it for you, you can't do this anymore. So there's a lot of shared experiences there that I think the two sides can really find some common ground and help each other with.
Yes, we actually are lucky to have association with a couple of NFL players, and I think its similarity to them is that they get injured, they come out, and now they're trying to find a sense of purpose again, because here they are playing, they're active, and all of a sudden they're injured, they come out, what do they do next? And it's very similar to us.
Iraq, Mosul, were you in the Middle East? Is that what you...
So actually we were both in Mosul at the same time. I had another tour that I was in Baghdad. You had a tour that you were in Baghdad also.
Correct.
And I was in Desert Storm.
Thank you both. And to have the ability to share the stories is also allowing you to kind of get back into a flow. And the story, there again, veterans who have not reached out to Wounded Warriors. This has been going on since 2012 with Radio Row. We've had guests on. Thank you both, first of all, for telling your story, but serving our country. We love you both. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having us.
We are live in New Orleans, Super Bowl 59, Radio Row.